Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I'm watching What Happened to London's Trams by Mapmen. So let's figure out what's wrong with London's trams. Link to the original video will be down in the description below.
Ask most people what they know about trams in London and they'll say,
I know there's trams in Croydon, but I think that's it.
But did you know London used to have the biggest tram network in Europe?
Okay.
So what happened to it? And why is Croydon the only part of London that has trams today?
So only a certain part of London has trams. That's kind of weird.
In oldie-worldy times, when pretty much every mode of transport involved a horse, the best way of getting lots of people to the same place was an omnibus. It was an uncomfortable and bumpy ride. But a clever solution would be brought to London by an eccentric Victorian billionaire from America, whose name was George Francis Train.
Ha! Really?
Mr. Train's
What a
cleverly
big
simple
hat.
idea was to have omnibuses run on rails running along the street. Mr. Train called them
So that's how it
trams.
started, huh?
Suddenly, horses could carry much heavier loads and go much faster and smoother without giving everyone an orgasm. This also made them affordable. Fares were set at the reasonable price of half a penny.
But
Half a
other
penny.
road
How
users
do you
hated
even
train
pay
trams.
that?
The rails weren't recessed into the road, they stuck out good and proper, tripping up other vehicles and causing their wheels to break off. But Train continued to build his tramways all over London without ever asking permission first, until he was stopped in his tracks in 1861 when he was arrested for breaking and injuring the Uxbridge Road. From now on, any entrepreneur wanting to build tramways in London would have to bury their tracks nicely into the road out of harm's way and pay for the maintenance of the entire road surface. This meant they now had to solve a rather sticky problem.
The average horse produced between 15 and 35 pounds of manure per day. It was famously predicted that if London's horse traffic continued to increase, it would be 9 foot deep in horse manure by 1950.
The solution eventually came at the end of the 19th century with a source that was safe, efficient, cheap.
Yeah, that would probably be the worst part of those. Just the horses pooping everywhere. Can you imagine walking around London while these things were around and there's just horse manure everywhere, every step of the way? Just imagine the smell. Actually, no, better idea. Don't imagine it. Just don't.
Clean and reliable electricity.
Electricity could be harvested either from cables above the road or a conduit below. Now that horses were electricity could be harvested
Is that thing really small, really short, or just
either from
because of the
cables above
camera
the road
angle?
or a
Because
conduit
that looks
below.
tiny.
Now that horses were
And
no longer required
overcrowded.
and the trams were totally turd-free, the network was able to grow and grow. The London County Council built new connections linking working-class suburbs with industrial areas to help get people to work, making it the first truly public transport system in London. They spread particularly far in South and East London to areas which, by no coincidence at all, continue to be poorly served by the tube.
Everywhere in London was getting electric trams. Well, almost everywhere.
If you look at this map of the network, you'll see a vast area close to central London where tram tracks fear to tread.
they
These
just
are
got
the posh
nothing.
parts of town, Kensington and Westminster.
Okay.
Well, that's understandable, I suppose. Westminster had historic streets, and those overhead cables were so ugly. That was the reason they weren't wanted here, right?
No.
Wrong. Many trams used the
Definitely not.
conduit system with no visible cables. So if it wasn't cables, why were they so trams-phobic?
Trams, for want of a better expression, were for poor people.
Local
Yeah.
campaigners complained that
The rich and privileged people didn't want them because they're a poor people thing. Oh my
trams
god.
catered for an undesirable class of person and successfully kept the entire central London area unbetrammed.
Thank you, sir.
Because of this, two vast networks north and south of the river remained unconnected. Not because of the Thames, but because of toffs. And it would stay like this until 1906, when a big and very impressive tramfrastructure project was built here.
Kingsway in Holborn was built by bulldozing straight down the middle of the slums. The Victorians used to do this sort of thing all the time. But Kingsway was special because it came with its very own tram tunnel, something never done in London before, or since.
This small but truly unique piece of track linking north to south meant that by 1914, London had the biggest tram network in Europe. Yay! But not for long.
By
After World
1914,
War I, money was tight, and tram rails
Yeah.
were expensive to maintain.
they were broke.
So the tram operators began turning to a newer, cheaper piece of technology, the trolley bus.
Trolleybuses were like trams, but on pneumatic tyres. They didn't need rails, which meant they were quieter and more flexible. And they could overtake things, like this dick.
It was the beginning of the
Well, at this point, why not just make a regular bus? Why even have the wires? You know, what's the point?
end for the tram, and the middle of the beginning for the trolley bus. But alas, alack, London's trolley buses were not long for this world.
One person whose fault this was Minister for Transport Ernest Marples, the man responsible for provisional driving licences, MOTs, traffic wardens, single yellow lines, double yellow lines, Dr. Beaching and several affairs with prostitutes.
Marples wanted people driving
7 affairs.
partly because the car was a symbol for individual freedom, but partly because Marples' family ran a tarmac company.
Marples got councils to change their streets to make more room for cars, which meant cables had to be torn down. London's vast network of trams and trolleybuses would need to be replaced by motorbuses.
Until then, the idea of getting motorbuses to take on such a big job was unthinkable. Motorbuses were small and heavy and noisy and inefficient.
So yeah,
But
they
that would
did
all
just
change
replace them with buses.
in 1959.
The new Routemaster bus, which was super efficient and ran on diesel, could carry almost as many people as a trolleybus, but had two massive advantages. One, drivers wouldn't have to worry about the trolley poles coming loose, and two, they could overtake each other. In fact, they could go literally anywhere.
With diesel
Well,
fuel now
hopefully
cheaper
no one
than
drove
ever,
off
it
a
was
cliff like
no-brainer.
that one.
From 1959, Routemasters began replacing tram and trolleybus routes all over London.
The network's capacity was reduced slightly, but since passenger numbers were dwindling anyway, nobody cared. Well, lots of
People
cared
just
and they were
preferred
really
buses,
upset
I
about it,
guess.
but nobody who mattered cared.
It was out with the and in with the... So, is there anything left of London's tram and trolleybus network that you can still see today? Well...
There are a few surviving tram sheds, some still with tram tracks in. There's a couple of trolley poles still there that are now used as lampposts.
Ooh.
There's a bus route in West London that still uses the number
Yeah, I guess why tear them down when you can just use them for lamps now?
607, the same as the original trolley.
Boring!
And this building in Walthamstow has the word tramway on it.
So the answer is no, not really. Nothing impressive. With one massive exception. This is what's left of the Kingsway Tunnel.
You can still see very, very, very clearly where the
So it's
tram
just
tunnel entrance
locked
used to
up?
be. Sometimes they open it up for tours, sometimes they use it as an art gallery, but at the moment it's being used to help Crossrail construction. Down at the other end, the entrance has been turned into the door of a nightclub, and the middle half has been turned into the Strand underpass.
And so the trams and trolleybuses had gone, and London forgot about them. And so did the whole country.
Cities up and down the UK were ripping up their tram tracks and pulling down their trolley cables. The
Everyone
only
just
place
got
in the
rid of
country
it.
that kept its tram was Blackpool Pleasure Beach.
Trams for decades evoked images of nostalgia in the olden days.
I used to take the tram for a farthing.
Even the word tram was funny.
Straight in front of a tram.
But then, something changed.
Traffic congestion was worsening, demand for public transport was increasing, pollution became a thing, and trams, suddenly, all of a sudden, had gradually started to suddenly become appealing again.
Croydon
Exactly.
in South London, which had a growing town centre and no tube, was the
Imagine having all that infrastructure, getting rid of it, replacing it with buses, and now suddenly you want all that back because it's a better solution. Oh, that's gotta hurt.
perfect place for a 21st century experiment. For the first time in 48 years, trams were coming back.
These trams would be a fair bit different from the 20th century ones. They were single, not double-decker,
Very
and they were
different.
multiple articulated units, which basically means they're bending. As well as running on the streets, the new trams would make use of bits of disused or underused railways, combining the on-street convenience of buses with the separateness and speed of trains.
The Croydon tram link opened in 2000 was an instant hit, attracting 15 million passengers in its first year. And that number's kept going up ever since.
At around the same time, very similar tram schemes opened in Manchester, Nottingham, Sheffield, Birmingham and Edinburgh. And don't get me started on the resurgence of trams in the rest of Europe.
So trams are very much back in business for the 21st century. But what about London? Are there plans for any more new tram routes in London?
The Cross River Tramway, planned to open in 2016, was meant to run from Camden Town to Peckham/Brixton. The route used Kingsway, but bafflingly had no intention of using the old Kingsway tunnel, instead running on the street above.
Why
The scheme
not?
had plenty of support, but not enough plenty of money, so it never happened.
Ah,
Then there was the West London tram,
Yeah,
planned
the
to run
budget
along one
cuts.
of London's busiest bus corridors from Shepherd's Bush to Uxbridge. But two burly men in suits holding a big sign were stood in the way, so this never happened either.
To be fair,
Oh.
a road like this...
Suits
Oh.
holding a big sign was stood in the way, so this never happened either.
To be fair, a road like this isn't suitable for modern trams, and most of London...
So they just said
To
no
dig
and
up
it
a
didn't
street this
happen.
narrow to build the tracks would be prohibitively impractical.
Some campaigners tried to save the West London tram by suggesting a compromise, where they just put the electricity cables up and make it a West London trolleybus instead.
Personally, I think that would have been a brilliant idea. A trolleybus is the best of both worlds. Cheaper and easier to build than a tram, but it still replaces noisy, polluting buses. In fact, come to think of it, why don't we do that everywhere?
London's more than 8,000 buses are a huge source of dangerous polluting air that kills 9,500 people per year. TfL have tried to make them greener, but the best they've been able to come up with is a hybrid bus that uses its diesel engine a mere most of the time.
The bad news is the technology for a 100% pollution-free bus that doesn't need cables at all is not coming anytime soon. So I say, let's get a groove on and hang those cables back up.
A modern trolleybus would only
Are there electric buses? There probably are, somewhere.
need cables on 2/3 of its route, and those cables wouldn't need to be so spiderwebby anymore.
There's no avoiding it. Those overhead wires would still be fugly. But it's not just technology that's moved on, it's our priorities too. And if 21st century Londoners finally get to breathe...
Who cares if it's ugly though? As long as it functions properly, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how it looks, just that it functions the way it's intended to.
clean air, then those hideous wires might end up looking quite beautiful.
So, they had some of the best trams, the best infrastructure for it, then they got rid of practically all of it, and now it's coming back. I wonder how long it's going to be until they get rid of all their trams once again. Because we all know history repeats itself, so it's going to happen. But anyway, that's enough about London's trams. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider subscribing and leaving a like. If you're interested, why not watch this video right here? And with that, I hope I'll see you in the next video.